Okay.
All right. So let's begin. Let me share. Do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Ok, deixa eu ver como é que faz para mim.
Você quer fazer a tela inteira?
É,
Tá vendo lá em cima no menu, apresentação de slides? Lá no menu de cima.
aqui, né? Ah,
É um dos iconezinhos da barra de atalho.
acabei de fazer.
Ah, tá. Aqui para mim não apareceu.
So, I organized this presentation about a subject that I've been researching since 2021 through participant observation and writing essays, writing reports, and doing something of an ethnography, participating especially in the WhatsApp groups of the patients, and reading the conversations and listening to the lives and transmissions of the doctors. That there are some lives that the doctors make that they delete the content just after making the live, so it's something of confidential content, close to the community. So I had access to various types of content regarding this subject and the debate of the pandemic, and I thought it would be a good case study for us to think about what we call the thesis of vulgarization, which I believe is related to the crisis of what is called the crisis of the mediators, of the crisis of experts, and this is a very good example of entrepreneurs, journalists, doctors, and people who taught their health autonomously, politicizing the subject and turning it into something of a civilizational or a social issue, an issue social in the sense that it regarded the totality of the society and not just health. So first, the origins of the early treatment. It was the origin was not exactly bottom up. It was made by a very specific group of politicians and influencers and doctors. Elon Musk was the first to talk about it, sharing Google documents written by two doctors who are actually financial consultants for Bitcoin companies and not practicing doctors. After that, Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, in India, other politicians. So you can say it was not something that it was something that was sort of he is the author of the docs that Elon Musk shared. He doesn't describe himself as a doctor. He describes himself as a not financial advice with his every Bitcoin quack.
Vitor,
What?
just to ask, are you changing the slides?
Hã?
Are you already changing? Você está mudando os slides já?
Tô.
Porque eu acho que para a gente não tá. Are you guys seeing the slides change or are they always the same?
Stuck on the first one.
Tá no primeiro slide ainda. Eu acho que quando você apertou o botão, ele só fez mudar para você.
Ixi, como é que faz então, será?
Espera aí.
Stop share.
Isso, compartilha de novo.
Onde que tá share, share, share? Aqui, share screen. Aqui, apresentação de slides. Agora sim.
Agora tá bonito.
Agora mudou?
Mudou. Show.
Tá. So, the origins. This is the first mention of hydroxychloroquine. It was by Elon Musk, citing this Google document written by these two doctors here, Jason M. Todaro and Gregory J. Regano. If you search their names, they do not describe themselves as doctors, despite having MD. They are financial advisors which work with Bitcoin companies. And if you see the dates, they are very closely related. Elon Musk began, Donald Trump shortly after, Bolsonaro shortly after, and this influencer, even before Bolsonaro, was talking, distributing data that proved that the chloroquine worked.
This tweet is from the 22nd of March. Like really 5 days after Elon Musk.
6 days after Elon Musk. So you could say it was not exactly a bottom-up movement. The material was produced in a centralized manner, translated in several languages by people who knew what they were doing, and after that, people took up the theory and made it into a mass belief. It's a bit complex but I'll try to explain how that happened and what does it mean. First, there was a very interesting article that discussed how the dissemination of chloroquine-related studies happened in 2020, and as I've noted here, more than 100,000 COVID-19 related papers and preprints published by December 22. Of these, hundreds were about chloroquine and other hundreds about ivermectin, and it was virtually impossible to navigate with this amount of information and scientific evidence or lack of evidence, and to sort of pre-proof and see what's true and what's not. What I mean to say is that there was a lot of science being produced, not most of it low quality science, but science nonetheless. And that was a problem that generated something of a crisis, because it was hard to really say there was a consensus about the subject because of the sheer number of studies contradicting each other. So you had to used an argument of authority regarding specific journals, but not everyone accepted that. But and not every doctor and not every scientist is actually educated to differentiate between a predatory journal and a legitimate journal, and that difference is actually something somewhat political too. So this creates something of an epistemic instability. But what I mean to say in this slide is that the COVID early treatment debate was not about faith exactly, but it was about evidence. So when it was launched, there was no debate. It was just being disseminated. In April, there was the beginning of the debate, and there was the presentation of evidence. In June, they stopped presenting evidence as the mode of dissemination changed. But this moment was important for the consolidation of a nucleus, a center of people that believed it was true. After these people kind of took the bait, they did not need further evidence to be convinced. So this is my hypothesis as to why, for example, there was this drop from 30 for 7%.
But just to clarify, Vitor, those 50% are half of the tweets were tweets mentioning, half the tweets about COVID were tweets with scientific method references, like scientific evidence or something, but not in favor of chloroquine, in favor of early treatment.
Not necessarily about chloroquine, but usually about methods of handling COVID.
Okay, in general.
After that, both sides talking about COVID stopped talking about evidence and started using argument of authority rather than evidence. So just giving some context, the early treatment movement, it was created among a sort of debate or dispute about how to handle the COVID-19 pandemic. And you could say there were two sides to this. There were not two sides, there were various sides, but you could say there were two sides in the West, at least, regarding how to deal with COVID. The first was the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed by 13,000 scientists, economists, doctors, and they defended what they call the focus protection. That is, you do not have to protect everyone from COVID, only those who are most vulnerable. It's the approach that we are living with now, and was the approach that Bolsonaro defended when he called it vertical lockdown. The vertical lockdown, isolating only the elderly and the immunocompromised. And there was the people from the John Snow Memorandum. Here in Brazil, we could say the stay-at-home people. And you could say from the size of the paragraph that it was a difficult position to defend, but basically they said that it was imprudent to infect everyone, and it would be especially cruel and deadly to the people who were poorest and had lack of health resources. Basically, that was the argument. So the debate was about among these two positions, and the early treatment uh, um, was proposed by people who were on the side of the Great Barrington Declaration. The problem that we have in this debate is that despite what epidemiologists may say that is safe or not, there is a difference within the working class globally and in Brazil. Here we have there was a global study and a national study about who can actually work from home, and in Brazil, this was the graphic we got. And nationally, the people who the higher percentage of people that could work from home was 27 to 30% in the south and southwest area, and the north and northeast, which are socio-economically more fragile, also had the least amount of workers that could actually work from home. So staying at home for them was not feasible unless we had some kind of something to pay for their unemployment. And globally, you could say that most of those that could work from home and defend the perspective of a lockdown were people who had higher income. The higher the income, the higher the percentage of people that could work from home. The doctors and politicians and entrepreneurs that proposed early treatment in Brazil, they were explicitly political. They did not treat it as a medical issue from the start. So I have a slide here from a video that was taken down from YouTube from Dr. Wong, who died from COVID, by the way, and there's a piece in PLE about how he was treated in the hospital that he had COVID, and he applied all the experimental medicine, medications and treatments on himself. So he actually believed in the efficacy of the treatment, but he also believed that it was a way to end lockdown, as translated here the title. And they had a strategy, and that's what I want to convey here. So this was this was a movement that had a project that was organized rather formally and had results. In 2021, out of 4 Brazilians had used yearly treatment medication against COVID. 1/3 of the doctors believed in chloroquine. And this year, 21% of Brazilian population believes in chloroquine and probably is taking the treatments that these doctors are offering against vaccination and that kind of stuff. So you could say it was a very successful political movement because it managed to convince 20% of the population that drugs that work, and thus that there was no necessity of protection measures for the poor and the less healthy people against COVID. I'm not saying they convinced as their actions were done on a public that did not have a history of self-medication and that made it possible, but I think it was a movement that understood the social composition of Brazil better than the other movements that defended lockdown and measures against COVID. So how did it organize itself? After the project was launched in a decentralized manner, people took it upon themselves to organize and take the treatment. So there were groups of patients, exclusive for patients, groups of patients with doctors, groups of doctors, exclusive, and an articulation of doctors with the government. In the patient movement, the the dynamics of organization were mostly by communal identification. For example, people who were excluded from their communities for defending early treatment and going against masks and that kind of stuff. So they found a group that would receive them, care for them. I put acolhimento because I don't know how to translate it exactly. So it is something of a people give care and receive care, and this is what moves the community. Doctors, they would mostly organize around a platform economy of Instagram lives, YouTube lives, Telegram channels, private courses, and client-professional relationships. And they would go to WhatsApp to get more clients. They would use the early to get clients, and politically they would do the lobby with the federal government to protect themselves from repercussions of the early treatment and to make the government do propaganda for what they were doing, promote them as good doctors. And so I thought the predominant manner of interaction here was the transactional economical mode, and the policy of herd immunity of Bolsonarismo would encompass all of these two groups and the groups that they shared, but I should have made some rules, but the government did not dictate what what the doctors and patients would do. The patient doctors would move the government, and the government would respond to the doctors and the patients. So usually Bolsonaro would say something about chloroquine or ivermectin after being pressured by this community of thousands of doctors and hundreds of thousands of patients. Despite what, but to the public, to people in the press, to doctors who thought it was an irrational behavior, it would appear as Bolsonaro made people take the medicine, but it was the opposite. People made Bolsonaro talk about the medicine so he would not lose the trust of his base that he decided to adopt. So here I describe a bit how the the patient movement dynamics worked, and it was based on a very specific dynamics of WhatsApp and Twitter and Facebook, which is urgent, latest, the latest study, the latest protocol. We need to share these because the communists are saying this isn't working, and we now have new evidence, and so it is a state of constant urgency and mobilization, and the doctors would provide content for this mobilization, which would be images, memes, protocols, and the other very important side of this were the personal experience of people and the service aspect of the group. People would ask for advice when they got sick, which meant they did not have access to an actual doctor because they were afraid or did not have access for some reason. And people would offer their personal experience and respond to the advice and form a bond with the people who asked for this advice. And they were, and the group managers usually would incentivize people to share their testimonies of how the treatment worked, so they could share in other groups and recruit more people. So you could say it was so as I say here with Letícia Cesarino, through such digital means, lay people as well as doctors came to play a pastoral function of providing care advice in the means that they could not find elsewhere. In contrast with the letter's cold, abstract, and impossible recommendations, the ecosystem offered personalized care, feasible practical guidelines, hope, and a sense of taking back control. So that affective side of the feeling of being able to respond to a pandemic when the mainstream media and the mainstream leftist influencers were saying we are gonna die and there's nothing you can do except locking except lockdown, and lockdown was not possible, so we are gonna die. So it made the combination of this composition, this political composition of the left not reading very well the needs and the angst of the bases, the population in the pandemic, and the right doing this reading correctly and working to deepen the the sense in these people that they could fight back somehow. So I just remember here what we call in the text here the what is vulgarization there, and I think it is very important to understand the early treatment, people who believe in it, that this bit is very important. So it's this a more situated description of the diagnosis of vulgarization might be that once social references themselves do not add up, a veritable social perspective becomes effective to the sense that the totality of the social world appears differently from different social standpoints. So the people who could not stay at home and who did not have access to healthcare and who have been taking a medication that did not work for 1 year or 2 years, they see life differently from people who could stay at home or who had this access to healthcare. And so we need to see how that perspective was possible, and why is it real? And why is it more real than the scientific perspective that is statistically more real? I don't know how to say it, but so here me and Leticia, we try to explain how peripherization is sort of explains, but not describes how vulgarization works. So there's, instead of a public sphere, we have refracted publics, which create a structure of pseudo-sociality. So there are some contents that are public and up to discussion, and there are closed groups where people kind of reproduce and defend themselves from hostile truths to their lived experience. But what is interesting in the ecosystem of early treatment is that they only are hostile to evidence that contradicts the early treatment. Another early treatment is not hostile to each other. So, and other communication spaces between contradicting protocols of early treatment medication, and that does not create any sort of crisis or problem or conflict. It just they just live in a shared ecosystem, reinforcing each other against. That is why it is important to understand the early treatment within the dispute of the lockdown. It only makes sense for people to accept that there are 20 different types of early treatment and they all work because they do not want the lockdown. So they do not want to accept that they have to remain at home or they will die. So they create a cognitive reality where it is possible that different medications in different doses in different times may work, and it is a choice, a personal choice, like a lifestyle, which one you choose. What is important in and that they have in common is that the patients are not left unattended, alone, and afraid. So this is the essential function of the community provided by the early treatment movement. That is why they spend money buying the medication and keep it doing it for a year, and that is the most important part. So what kind of people compose the ecosystem? You have the other than the patients, we have empresários, né, entrepreneurs, individual patients who want to save their families, health insurance companies, people who want to make pharmacists, owners of pharmacies, owners of tourist business that want people to start traveling, people who sell telemedicine, people who sell master classes, YouTubers, Instagrammers, and some mayors who got re-elected after doing the early treatment. And it is interesting to see that there was something of an experiment of this kind of composition producing something of an epistemology and a methodology of legitimizing their political choices as evidence-based. There was a study in Sorocaba, for example, where they
Did you drop? Is Victor frozen for everyone?
Yeah, he's frozen here also.
Let's see if he's... Yeah. Clearly the CIA, you were brought down by a beam, Vitor. You're muted.
where was I?
Can I take advantage of the fact that we had a brief pause just to see if you like this? I was trying to do something to help kind of exactly what you were saying, to kind of clear up who was involved, right? So like just because I think last time we talked about this, it was really clear to me. I felt like it was really good. See if this makes sense. So just so I can see if I understood. So we have, let's say, patients and their families. And as you were saying, this has a lot to do, like this WhatsApp groups and so on. They're all facing risk of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we have a second group of people involved, which are actually a professional class, which is doctors, and for example, insurance
Health plans.
companies,
Mm-hmm.
and hospitals. And I'm not putting like businessmen in general, because these people here were professional. It's not just a matter of losing money in general, it's that their professions were at stake, right? Like doctors don't have, like they're losing money, right?
Yeah.
Like I just want to separate this from, let's say, the general pressure against lockdown because everyone needs to be working so that companies can make money. It's more specific than that, right? Then there is like politicians, but also people who are, let's say, kind of general leaderships. So like influencers and so on. People who are, let's say, what they risk to lose or gain is power and influence, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not losing money because of their businesses. They're not acting based on fear of dying. And then it seems like there is a final group, which is, let's say, proper, companies, businessmen, and so on, who is not money in the sense of my profession, my salary. It's like capital. It's like a big money, right?
Yeah.
Which is something different. And then what you were saying that I found very interesting is that there seems to be always something like this. See if this makes sense. Just erase this here. Like you have first, let's say, WhatsApp groups that are only made of patients.
Yeah.
So they're like more community based. Nobody's taking care of us. We need to take care of ourselves. Then you have something which is probably like mixed here, which is community groups, but they also have like doctors inside because they're friends of families of somebody, something like this. So you have like community plus some authority figures.
Yes.
Right?
And people then trying to sell
stuff, give you ideas, say like my cousin is a good doctor, he can help out or something. And like there is the actual just the doctor groups, which are like just professional class groups, right?
Yeah, they discuss protocols and experiments.
And they mix here because these probably are also shared. They're surely doctors who were in like community groups, they were also in these doctor groups as well, right?
Yeah.
So they're shared. So you have like totally green, then mixed green with red, then totally red, then like probably not a WhatsApp group, but you would have like spaces for politicians to debate, like let's say in the state or parties and so on. But you also have like some lobby meetings where you get both politicians and
it was the gabinete paralelo, and there was with the company with the doctors.
And the company, you mean like the big companies, right?
Yeah, the big companies with the doctors and the politicians, maybe like something of a tree.
Yeah, so we have also here the companies like in themselves.
Yes.
And also we have the companies, let's say, doing like this, right? Probably. I mean, we know there is this, which is, let's say, everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
But also you're saying that there was something that did like this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's nice to see, like, again, it's a really good example of this, this is mostly mode A. This is mostly mode C, but like what Marx would call simple circulation, right? It's not capital. This is commodity becoming money, becoming commodity, right? And this is money becoming commodity, becoming more money. Like this is the big bucks. They separate, right? So this is also mode C, and this is more mode B. And the logic that you're showing us here, this is like a perfect example of what exactly as we were calling vulgarization. Like you never get complete everything on top of everything. You always have like a mosaic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like companies are also here in the lives of these people, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so probably we should, yeah, probably this last thing should be like this. I don't know. But it makes sense, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
The anti-lockdown movement was the companies with the community.
Okay, this is anti-lockdown.
The protests and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so because this is a really good example, it shows that it takes, you know, like this would be from our perspective, this would be a claim that this is effective because it is dispersed in a way that is similar to the way reality is dispersed, right? Like this guy could not go to a voting booth and vote for a representative. The representative would go and, you know, defend his rights. He's already forgotten, so he needs like a informal authority. That informal authority needs to informally talk to doctors that make lobby to the state, that are also being lobbied by you need that crazy mixture to make it work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Sorry guys, I just felt like this could be useful.
Yeah, could you redraw this on the monster diagram, like using the hybrid modes as the interlocking? Basically taking what you already drew, but like arranging it in the monster diagram, right?
Just 1 second. This one, right?
Yeah. Right, you have the businesses for C, and then had communities for A.
Yeah, so here's a business. Then we have like patient communities. Then the state here, right? And then you have the mixtures, because we have doctors plus patients here. Doctors lobbying, making lobby on the state, right? We didn't really see anything that's looked like mode B, state and people mixed. Perhaps the anti-lock, yeah, but the anti-lockdown seemed to be very much at the core here, right? Like, I don't remember what I added there.
Yeah,
Aren't
but
there these moments when
shows that it works.
Bolsonaro kind of like he kind of invoked the Brazilian specificity about resilience in the face of COVID and whatnot? Like, didn't he kind of like make nationalist gestures that could kind of be like where A plus B comes together, that like we as a nation are going to survive this in a particularly Brazilian way?
I do think that the states did refer, like there were influencers and state people directing themselves at the community, saying like, you should hold on, this is a good thing, this makes you stronger. I would probably put like web influence plus, let's say, state pronunciations, you know, like pronouncements, like official things, like directed at people based from the state, from the power of the state, you know? Does that make sense, Vitor, to you? Like, do you think this kind of makes sense?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's
Right.
it's
So
a good. I tried to, but I forgot the how to do the model. But I think it's like that.
Yeah, because then we can actually, I mean, if I just use the colors that I used there, just to not to change things too much from this, right? You get patients and families here. You get the states and politicians here. You get businessmen and then doctors there. We can put, you know, big capital when it's concerned with let's everyone get back to work, it's here. And then you get, so WhatsApp communities here for patients and families. And you have, let's say, as a classic, let's say, communal problem, the problem, well, people dying. Here you have the problem of losing money. And here you have the problem of losing power. Or gaining power, right? Like becoming an influencer during the pandemic or something like this. And then you get doctors making lobby to the state here, sorry. As Vitor was saying, pressing the state. Here you get you get this, so politicians directly speaking to communities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a sort of both ways. It was a quick answer from to a difficult problem for both, for the community and the politician.
Mm-hmm. And
So
here's
sort of
doctors in like friends of family and like doctors people trusted. Right, and here the W is both, let's say, the capitalist center, but it's also go back to work. Which, I mean, considering our last meeting where we were talking about work as a synthetic thing that binds together modes A, B, and C in capitalist society, it makes perfect sense that this is the core thing.
it was yeah, but I just remember the model. It was against the death of CNPJs, against the death of capital. It was
that was the how do you say that in English? CNPJ. How do you say this, guys, when you have like it's not your physical, not your personal register, but you register as a company, you know, like your legal existence as a company. There's probably a name for this.
In Portuguese, it's juridical person. Just
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a name for that in English.
Oh, yeah, like a legal person.
Because
What was his slogan against death?
That's because in Brazil there's like when people who defend police killings, they say the police are deleting a CPF, which is a personal number of identification. So it's like people die, but CNPJs die too. The companies were like make that statement.
Yeah, that we should go back to work to keep legal corporations alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they explicitly said that. Like in Brazil, people are not really metaphorical these days. They just say it out loud exactly what it is. Yeah, but I mean, I'm quite impressed how this fits. And I also think, I mean, I don't want to take too much time. I want to let you go back to your presentation, but just, this is something we rarely had examples of these mixtures, And I think that in Vitor's presentation, we have really good ideas of like people who do interface. Like you have a community group based on like people worried about being alive. Then you have like, well, but there's some of us are doctors. Some of us know doctors. Some of us, by the same reciprocity principle of trust some specific people a bit more. And then you already have the means to create an intermediate group, right? That will bridge between a professional class concerned with continuing to make money during COVID with a communitarian problem, right? Like the two things, suddenly you can find an interface for them. So I don't know, it works. I think it works really well.
Yeah, I was reminded because I tried doing something that was similar, but I don't think it had the level of it wasn't as fine-grained as your presentation, Vitor. When I was talking about the Institute of Other Studies, and one of the reasons that at least me and Gabriel talking about it, of the diagnosing of the failure of the Institute of Other Studies, was the fact that we didn't have the interface between A and B and C. Wasn't it something like that, Gabriel? I mean, there was this lack, and the lack of the failure of the organization, it seemed to be around that point. Mm-hmm. And now you're presenting an organization that actually works and is really like a fine-oiled machine. And it's nice to see all these interlocking parts.
It's not by nice is you mean in the same way that it's nice to see like an atomic bomb, right? And to be like, whoa, it's beautiful.
Yeah, come on. This is just like the Kantian sublime. It's like
you can just draw here like a huge. So let me...
But I think that's why I think it was a social movement. If I don't know if you can call it that, but that just resonated with the Brazilian social composition. They read it very well. It's not that you read it, but it's not exactly something of a subject, homogeneous subject, but it worked. And that's what's really interesting about it. And if you see how the pandemic did not affect Bolsonaro's vote at all, the pandemic response did not make any difference in the polls. At least it's if you see this kind of how he operated this kind of organization, there are other that happen at the same time. Besides this, it makes more sense. You can understand what's going on with people, why don't they care about what Bolsonaro did during the pandemic? They were busy doing this movement.
And it's also very amazing the way you describe how passive. I mean, it looks like, I'm not sure like if it's a matter of who did it what first, but it's very amazing how both like the government actually first responds to doctors and the lobby. It doesn't start the thing, right? So from the outside, it looks like the government is creating something, but from within the government is just responding to something and kind of negotiating with that, right?
And in the groups, the people are like, Bolsonaro is not supporting enough early treatment. He needs to be more explicit. He needs to say it more. People are unsatisfied with him. and they were very unsatisfied that he let the CPI that happen and such. They did not feel as a movement with loyalty to the president. It was a movement yeah, a lobbying movement, a social issue movement. I don't know. It was a health movement. It's a perverted, weird movement of people autonomously demanding that they are they they use the whole scientific thing to make the organization work. That I think it's yeah, I agree, and I think that's important. That this part about science. It's a bit of a. It sounds a bit. Okay, share. Okay. So there's this study. Sorocaba did one. Various mayors did this kind of study that proved the air treating worked, and it was like they would say, we are the real scientists. We are the ones who believe in empirical evidence. The people who are politically manipulating truth are the others. They would do this this thing, this rhetorical maneuver, and that this mechanism was very. Do you see the slides? No, no.
Yes. It's just not that big. Like it's bigger now. It's better. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Total, we're gonna. Okay. So you could say they I discussed this with Leticia, and it was like they had a kind of scientific method, in the sense they had an experiment, and from the experiment they had a result, but from the result they jumped to general conclusions that were not possible to make from these experiences. So it's called this epistemologies, and from this they would get protocols, and people would share if it worked or not, and it would kind of mingle with something that is very common in the culture of the West. That is this thing that positive thoughts will make you healthier. You have to cultivate your immune system to be better and take vitamins, and some kind of common sense mixed with experimental science, and this created what we call the out science. Out science, in the sense that it is a form of knowledge that calls itself science, but it's completely it's not really, but it it competes with science, and it takes the place of science in some cases. Here, I forgot about this part. It was an example of how this composition works in reality. So I take the example of a patient that he went to Dr. João, and when he came to the clinic, he said they could remove the masks because he was healthy and would not transmit because he had the medication. So he made him feel safe because he had the medication, and he requested multiple tests, accompanied the family, checked the family WhatsApp. When the result came back negative, despite the person have symptoms, they believed it was the doctor and the medication that saved them. So these patients took medication for the doctor and began sharing the medication with their families. So here's an example of a conversation in a family group. So it's like Gabriel said, there is a mingle of the patient and the doctor who is trusted by the patient, and they do this horizontal movement, and the patient develops some stuff that the doctor didn't even say. It is an interpretation that the patient does autonomously, but the process of making the patient feel safe and making multiple tests, some of them unnecessary and a waste of money, but you have made a test, and these people become converts, and they began to spread the movement. So that this is the typical manner in which people become believers of the medication. And finally, that's something that I just wanted to throw out there because it's very weird, but so they would build like a basis of knowledge and protocols based on testimonials, advice from people who took the medicine, doctors who are trusted, and it was actually formalized in the Bird Conference, the British Ivermectin. They did like a World Congress with doctors, patient experts, and journalists, and they voted the best measures against COVID. They voted. They did like a list with suggestions from doctors, patients, and journalists, and they voted, and they made a document like a political document of a political congress, but as a protocol for treating COVID, using Google Forms and such. And to me, it's kind of a weird mix of like if giving more value to popular and personal experience and alternative knowledge and quackery. So it's I think it's something interesting to think about, considering our manner of research, which also involves a lot of personal experience, and I think the right has been doing this for a while, and deciding important stuff based on this method. And yeah, that's it. The thing that you can say is the fundamental point of the early treatment movement is trust. Trust between patients, trust in doctors, distrust of institutions and experts. This is the most important, I think, principle of social relationships that involves the efficacy of this movement. So how to build trust and how to build distrust is the most important aspect for its, let's say, resiliency. It's still in 2022, 20% of Brazilian population still believes that medication that doesn't work works. Why? How? Trust. And that's it. The conditions I stipulated some conditions for no, okay, for this kind of stuff to work. I think it is necessary that we have a highly effective working class experience. In Brazil, at most 16% of the workforce managed to do home office. Daily treatment also was very relevant in South Africa, in United States, and in India, which I think there is something there in the racism and caste system that makes it easier for this kind of movement to flourish. I think the importance that media platforms had for the experience of the pandemic, for people, how they perceive the pandemic being mediated by a platform is very important for this movement to work, because they will go to Instagram, then they will find a doctor there, they will go to WhatsApp and find people, they will go to Facebook and find the doctors who are hiding on the algorithm, and that we need an economic and political crisis, because in fear, I think people need to be insecure and they need to be unsure of who to trust, so that this movement can enter. And I think it was important, at least here in Brazil, that the government did not offer clear guidance and clear care and anything, and actually reinforced the doctors' movement. And the doctors mostly, besides the official position of doctors' associations being against early treatment and in favor of lockdown, the majority of the doctors were, in my opinion, reinforcing the governmental politics. So this is an important condition, I think, for for it to have worked as it did in Brazil. And that's it for the presentation. I will stop sharing.
Man, that was amazing. To go back to the, sorry, I think my camera is working. To go back to the, because I think there's a chat here where people are talking about, and you mentioned this as well, about taking seriously the fact that there is a political subjectivity at stake, right? I was wondering, what do you think of this? So we can, because when we discussed this in Brazil, you were the one who brought up that our idea of this diagram for political subjectivity, it should apply to the right, remember? And then we said, well, we need a way to distinguish right-wing political revolution and left-wing. So we came up with the inverse one. So if you look at both of them, you can see that there are three colors, right? One is saying who acts, the other is saying who constrains, like who sets the rules, right? And the green one is who maps, like who gets to see the world, like who gets the picture of the world, which usually is just the distinction between I try to act in the world doesn't respond like I want, well, I learned something about the world this way. It's like the basis for both popular and kind of serious science, if you want, right? So in the leftist or the emancipatory version that we did for this, the idea is that you have this basic conservative structure, which we could call like this, the liberal functioning of things. Individuals act on mediations, mediations act on the world constrains mediations, which constrain individuals. These two things happen pretty much the same way as individuals get to act everywhere and are constrained by everywhere. And then the leftist thing would be to say, yeah, but you can have mediations which are political, which are also constrained by an ecology, by a larger movement, right? And they're acting on that movement as well. And when you are an individual engaged in this political movement, that political movement also constrains you to be a different individual. And then you act as this different individual on that political ecology, and that political ecology acts making a different world. And ultimately, what we're looking for is to produce different individuals who belong to political organizations and to political ecology in the same way that they belong to this new world. So that would be like the big distinct. Okay, but the nice thing is now to think about the right wing, because we inverted all the arrows. And the cool thing about this idea, which I think applies very well to what you're saying, is that while in the left wing version, the idea is that this is a smaller world. This is a world where just some things are possible, like schools are just schools. In this larger one, more things are possible. So when you go to this larger triangle, you have a bigger world. That's where the world has a plus here. Whereas it would be a reactionary thing to ultimately try to reduce the size of the world, right? So we have this other drawing here. Let's say you have purple individuals. They form like mediations, like groups, and you have a larger world made of all these groups, right?
Ultimately, if you think your lived experience is more important than a random clinical trial to know something, you are reducing your knowledge of the world.
Exactly. And look, the individual is constraining the mediation. You will only accept mediations that fit with individual experience, right? Whereas in the case here, you have the inverse. Mediations constrain individuals. So the good thing about this is that you have this smaller triangle, which in liberal societies might be the same, the small one. But, and this is where I think what you were saying enters the picture, right? What you just said in the end of your presentation seems to me to be something like, similar to saying something like, this internal triangle here is in crisis. So liberal consensus is in crisis. And then you get like an alternative community here, like an ecology of groups, organizations, which is pretty much this here is this. These are a bunch of different mediations forming an ecology, right? So this is the ecology you described at the beginning. How do you bring together groups of patients who are afraid with their families, and then doctors and lobbies and politicians and companies and so on, right? Then you have here exactly what you showed, which is individuals who, through the engagement with this community here on top, right, they become what you call the convert, which is here, which is both, let's say, it's a dignifying position because you teach things. You're allowed to be the expert. You're not just taking in advice, right? As you said, the person invents something. Like that's even the moment they become a convert, right? They are not just taking orders. They're also saying what is true. They're contributing, they vote and so on, right? And on the other hand, this creates, let's say, a world where this contradiction inside the real capitalist world between how science actually functions in the capitalist world, which is already a complicated thing full of politics that nobody wants to talk about, they reduce it to a world which is what we call the alt science movement. It would be something like this. And then, so why is this good? Just because this shows that it's what you call the reinforcement structure, right? It's not just that you did something crazy. The whole thing reinforces itself. If you become a convert, then the way you relate to the alt science movement confirms that you did something good, that gets you to interact with more people, that also changes the world in a way that gets back to you, right? So I think what you're describing is how this could be in a certain crisis. Then through these processes here, right? This has to do, I think this is actually where the alt science movement appears, right? Through the creation of like through lobbies, doctors, interests, they create ecology. That ecology gets to both sponsor genocide, sponsor, silencing experts who they don't care about. So it reduces the size of the world, right? Yeah. So you get death, silencing, you get like people being cast aside, segregation, so on. Here you get, but this confirms to these people, right, that there is some they have a position as converts, as people who are concerned. It's like serious workers who are not going to let the country go to shit, and they connect to this thing here. So this is more stable than the inner triangle, right?
Yeah, and like when the inner triangle gives a hostile or negative response to the individual, he reinforces the outer circle even more. So it kind of kind of tiro no pé. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, good question. They shoot themselves in the foot? Is that a thing?
It's the liberal response to that movement. Kind of, it only works if you are not a convert. If you are a convert, then you don't. That it will reinforce your adhesion to the movement.
Yeah, no, but I think that ultimately, with the last things you were talking about, I mean, we would have to be more specific, more detailed here. But I feel like even that we could use to understand better how these two diagrams could work. Like even that kind of functions well with this. And also, I mean, I think that the core of what you said is that ultimately, there is, like, if we just look at this structure here, right, it looks like this is a very core part of it, this trust structure, right? And that there is some, I would say that there is something about like I don't know, I think we talked about this. I still can get this out of my head. Like I really feel like this is relevant, that like if you take like flat Earth as this kind of paradigmatic conspiracy, right? Because it has no purpose. It's not like COVID negationism or, you know, climate change negationism. It's like a pure conspiracy almost. Everything that it does is that it reduces everything global to local, in the sense that locally the Earth is flat, right? And flat earthers just say that, well, from where I stand here, around me, things are flat. So why should I generalize them with a property that I don't see locally? Like, they're empiricists, right? In some sense. So it's very funny because this really applies here, right? Let's say, as a regular individual, there are contradictions between the mediations you need to survive and the real world. You become a negationist because from this point, you get to reduce the world in your community through your mediations to a world that actually now these things really fit together, right? And one of the contradictions in the case of the flat earth that I think is really good is that this guy here, he doesn't know if the earth is flat or not. He doesn't learn in school, he knows nothing. And then he turns to like an American liberal, annoying person. And that person actually doesn't know as well. They just believe that the earth is not flat, which is not the same as knowing. So you ask, like, the person makes you feel bad about something you don't know, but ultimately you're seeing that they also don't know. Like, if you...
There was a study by the IT, I think it was an ethnography of negationist data journalists communities, and they said that the way they talk about data and science was more nuanced and more realistic than the way the people who follow the science talked about science, because they would say that the way you show the data has different effects politically depending on how you use proportions and how you measure things and what kind of stuff you count, what kind of stuff you don't count. And the people who follow the science didn't think about any of that, but they did. So they would say, for example, to say the COVID wasn't so bad, instead of using the deaths, they would instead of using deaths as an absolute proportion, they would cases versus deaths. So deaths is a minor portion of cases. They knew that putting it like that was a manner of making people feel safer, and they knew that the people who put it in other ways were trying to make other people feel less safe. So they actually knew, despite the being trying to prove that COVID was safe when it wasn't. They had a distorted view of safe, but they actually thought about it.
You know, I think this is a perfect example, because what I wanted to get at is that we had like, when we created this thing, we realized that, well, this is meant to be conservative. The world stays the same. But if this is true, that and this should be the same. Even though the arrows are inverted, they should pretty much describe the same world. But I think it's a difference between, let's say, I know the Earth is not flat in the sense of knowledge, right? Because it's not like I believe. I could try something and I would get an information back and I would model the world through science that it is round. This is, I believe, like, I don't want to make any effort. It's just easier for my life to engage with public discourse as if it is not flat. I think that it's interesting to see that in most interactions for flat earthers, they know the truth that most people don't really know that the earth is not flat. Like, people don't know how to prove it. I remember many times when I was in debates about negationism and things like this, I said, okay, you're telling me these people are idiots because they believe the earth is flat. Like, how do you know the earth is not flat? Just show me like how easy it is to you to prove this. And most people, they will, like humanities students, grad students, they will say, but look at a photograph. And I mean, they just spend like 10 years studying how photographs are deformed, you know, political images. But then when it comes to talking about science and earth being a sphere, they will just use the photo. So it was clear there was some hypocritical, like there is politics inside your science. Everyone is seeing it, that it has a class status. You're the only one pretending like it's not. So that's a really good way of showing how this supposedly progressive, stable triangle, which is just the smallest version of progressive politics, can easily become a reactionary thing where I'm actually just professing a belief. I'm not really developing any knowledge. I'm just pretending I am. So the convert actually seeing the truth of something about that fake sciencey arrogance, which is also a belief, not a knowledge, right? At least they know it's a belief, whereas the kind of,
Yes.
you know, human,
Yes.
right? So I wonder, I think that that's a really good kind of example of how you shift from this like conservative but towards progressive version of liberals towards the liberal as the basis for something reactionary to be born out of it. Because the basic claim is that you were never, you pretended like you're progressive. I know you are actually reactionary, arrogant guy who doesn't want to know anything. Just want to have the upper hand on me.
No, but it's a bit about the incapability of acknowledging ignorance, and that we're making political bets based on principle. For example, when we talk about China made a bet and is keeping the bet until now. They saved hundreds of millions of lives, probably. We don't know, but we probably. But when people in United States and Brazil defended lockdown, you kind of we didn't know if it would work. We didn't know. It was a bet, but they presented it as it was a foolproof. It was not. The way we did it didn't work. So it has something of true. The critic of the it's something a bit hard to admit, but it's because when the right says lockdown broke Brazil, they're saying the anti-pandemic policies, the way they were made in Brazil, didn't work. And the response is there was never a lockdown in Brazil. But we know there was a lot of stuff. There were a lot of stuff that we tried to do. That it's kind of a cynical response. I think I think the right gets more again. It's not like, oh, the right's so great. They're just being more sincere, I think, in what they're saying than the liberal counterpart.
Mm-hmm. Because I think that you can see this very clearly in the way the left is always a bit perplexed that, you know, it's funny, like we expect science to be political where it is not. Like knowing the truth, scientific truth should organize people automatically to substitute trust, right? And we don't know science to be political where it is, that even in real life results that are methodologically proven and have evidence, still they don't become popular because of the science behind them. They become popular because of the trust, right? I mean, it's not the same thing as believing in science and thinking science.
Yeah.
So,
and they trust the government wants to save their lives or not, or they think the government wants to kill them. It's basically that. I don't trust the government to save my life in Brazil. I don't either. It's not it's not that insane.
Exactly. So I really like this idea because you get to see that there is some reason, and I think that this has to do with the idea of popularization versus vulgarization, which is science circulates like it's science because it's supposedly to be perfectly transmissible because truth should be truth anywhere, right? We confuse scientific truth with public discourse. Public discourse was held together by the society of work and by the fact that being a citizen, a consumer, and a worker was something socially constructed, and everyone was meant to be in the public sphere in that condition. That you were supposed to believe what fits with the public discourse that is interesting for state, nations, and capital is not the same as what makes science true, right? But I feel like modernity, recent modernity, was based on not seeing the difference between those two things. Then with this misalignment we've been discussing about class structure, public space, what vulgarization implies, public circulation and truth are now separate. It's more obvious that things circulate because there is communitarian bonds around them, and truth and thinking are something else. I mean, they were never part of public discourse. That's not true. We always just believed stuff, right? If people had like a profound thinking relationship to science or to anything like this, it was an intimate relationship, like not because it was popular, right? And now I think that we're, on the one hand, the left is having to come to terms that what it called truths often were just shared beliefs, and we are not ready to accept that we believe the earth is not flat rather than we know it. We're sphere earthers rather than flat earthers, but that doesn't mean we know the earth is not flat for most of the time. While the other part, which is the actual truth of science, is not the truth of politics. So it cannot substitute or actual organization. I feel like that's really good, like two extremes of the problem for the left.
I was dealing with some of bullshit from my cat, so I don't know if I missed this part. But I was really interested in she was like eating the plant behind me. I don't know if I missed this part, but I was really interested in this recent discussion because in a sense, it seems that the liberal space is an uneasy space because you are neither going up, you're not going in any of the directions in the diagram. You're not going like, you're not being a conservative flat earther, which is coming to terms with the limits of your perspective in a sense. And you're also not going outside in the sense, like, I think there's an idea that it seems like, and I think the inversion is very interesting, the fact that they are inverted diagrams, because it does seem that there is a truth element that is vital to both of these extremes. And the more liberal you are, the more you are on the spheres, what is it? Sphere earther, where you're just like putting your beliefs, you're suspending any need to examine them. You're like forever postponing them. I was thinking of the William James's idea of the credit, like truth is like a credit system. You just keep putting things in the bank, and then oh shit. See, she's bullshitting me. So truth is like a bank, and then you're like credit system, and then things go out of place when someone demands, like, what funds this credit, this operation you're doing. And when you are in a vulgarized space, if I'm getting where you're going, it seems like the credit system is a bit broken because you can't rely so much on your currency being accepted in all different spaces. It doesn't work anymore. So that makes so you have two efforts. You have like this compositional effort, which seems to be like, okay, we don't have a credit system. We need to, in a sense, reestablish these relations. You have to literally compose. And on the other hand, you have the other ones, the conservatives and the reactionaries. Sorry, and I also really love that documentary because they are truth seekers, the truth of the perspective. And I was thinking about this because, in a sense, I think many of the discussions in politics, at least the ones I see and see people finding, it seems that, well, there is this, you can either like accept that things are vulgarized. I think that's an idea that's becoming more and more distributed in a sense, not like hegemonically, but I think it's something that you can find in many different works. But when it seems that like there are two different things between how you react, like if you're going outside or inside, in a sense. I mean, I'm thinking the conservative, it's also an inside, you're going inside because the world is going smaller. That's what I was, even if it's just an inverted diagram. But I was thinking that because first you have a composition that's like conspiracies. I think, I don't know who said it because I had to leave the room, but it seems like you're only stitching things from the inside. So in a sense, you are composing things, but this composition, it seems like it's not, it's aware that there is no like ready-made space where you can circulate, but at the same time, it seems that it doesn't appeal to an org or to a larger space. This is something that I'm not really structured, but I think what stood out for me is that it seems like there's this really intense truth practice in the conservatives. They are dealing with things that are more precise, in a sense, more real, more like trustworthy, in a sense, as you've all been saying. And this is like, it makes it a bit more confusing how to further differentiate, I think, the question. But I do think that there's this strange issue that is something that's apparent in many of the discourses on the end of the horizon of expectation, end of whatever. It seems that like, well, the end of the horizon is only for like the credit system is gone, it's out of joint. So in a sense, I think that the reaction is they are also trying to I think like recompose stuff, but I think I'd like to get a keener sense on the difference between the conspiracy composition and the like leftist emancipatory. Oh, I remember the last thing I was going to say. I'm sorry, I'm dragging on a bit. Because I think the word belief was being thrown around and like
thrown around. Yes.
Yes. I heard it somewhere. It's been people are talking. And I do think that it's very interesting. I mean, because I think beliefs are in a sense true, in the sense that they are a piece of information. And in a sense, I think the cringeworthy effect of reactionary points of view is that they are not something you can just like explain away as falsehoods, as you can do normally to conservative politics. And I do think that this difference between belief and knowledge, I mean, knowledge being able, I mean, that's at least how I think about it through the diagram. Knowledge is being able to locate and situate your beliefs in a wider framework where more is explainable. And the conservative, the reactionary point of view seems the opposite. Like a knowledge is something you can situate in your own belief, in a sense. Maybe that's also a difference. Like all these the effect, the possibility of like dispersing these treatments and these beliefs is the fact that in a sense they reduce knowledge to the belief level.
But I think that there is a distinction I like very much between belief and knowledge that I think is relevant when we're interested in discussing politics and different political processes and how they expand or reduce the world. Like if I think you know something, knowing that you know doesn't mean that I know the content of it, right? So if I think you know something about physics, doesn't mean I know the thing you know. But if I believe you believe something about physics, I know the content of your belief. So I never need to assume in first person the belief to know the content of that belief. Whereas in knowledge, I cannot know the content of the knowledge unless I assume it in first person. That's why delegated belief is a big topic for Zizek, because structures of belief, they can organize a society without you agreeing with people. Everyone can disagree, but believe that someone else has a belief. I don't believe it, you don't believe it, we hate each other, but because we believe a third person has that belief, we already have it in our minds. Whereas knowledge doesn't work like that. So if you're interested in organizing, let's say, it's very common to think, I think that's something we need to talk about as well, because we've been working a lot in the idea that when people politically organize, it's not just that they believe the revolution, is that you get to know more things you would know than you would know by yourself, right? So it's easy to see how belief works in politics. It's hard to see how knowledge beliefs works in politics. You constantly start thinking about science, and that's not what we mean, right? So I think that this idea that you there is a lower cost for belief to circulate because of this. If, for example, if you have in a newspaper saying some guy believes something, I don't need to start believing it directly to be engaged with that belief. You can have a delegated relation. Whereas knowledge doesn't work like that. It's costly to circulate knowledge because you need to actually know it. It's not the same, right? So if there is a piece of news saying we just found out the universe is non-local, like the piece, like Alain shared it with us, this physics news from a website. We believe that now physics knows the universe to be non-local because a physicist knows it, but we don't know it. And circulating that belief is very cheap, right? Circulating that knowledge is very expensive. So I think that it makes sense to look at this economy as two different economies, right? And probably why producing organization around scientific knowledge is so expensive. You can make it around scientific belief, but then you would have to make it explicit about that. You couldn't pretend like it's knowledge, probably, right? Like I think there's something in that level there that is relevant to how we move ahead with that issue, because the other side of this is that belief is cheap, but there's nothing to learn. Once you believe somebody believes, that's it. Whereas knowledge is expensive. Just because somebody knows doesn't mean that I know it. But then there is an unknown, something to learn. So it tends to be more also expensive in the sense of expansion, right? So I feel like in between those two aspects, there is something to understand a bit better why building politics around consensus over climate change or, like COVID stuff that might be relevant to that.
Yeah, and actually the way you were saying, I know I've been going back to this essay a lot, but it was just like, it was a real banger, like to repeat how the younglings talk. The Badiou's essay on the autonomy of the aesthetic process, because he has this like weird theory of enunciation that an enunciation is ideological if if you can disconnect it from its context. Like I'm synthesizing here, simplifying also, but so you have like an aesthetic process if you cannot take an enunciation and remove it from its context. And he gives like a really simple example. If an author says something like, leftists are losers, that's like a sentence that's ideological in the sense that like anybody can say it. It can be said anywhere. But if you have like Gary said, leftists are losers, to make sense of that enunciation, you have to connect it to Gary, which is a character, which is connected to certain events and so on. So I was thinking that in a sense, maybe that difference between belief and knowledge can also be thought through that the cost of connections. I think there's a simple tool in that. And like if you take, for example, the Earth is flat, that's like really that's easily discontextualized because everybody sees a flat horizon in a sense. I mean, I don't know if it's a flat horizon, what you call it, but nobody sees the Earth as round. You have to like really connect your perspective to other stuff to make it not flat. And maybe that's a way. I mean, at least that's something that interests me. So I think that this discussion you brought, Vitor, I think it's like really on point for actually connecting the discussions and actually highlighting reactionary politics in a way that's not merely hand waving and saying like the right is bad. I mean, you're making a lot of costly connections. I mean, literally, I mean, the work you have to do, but.
What I was going to ask Vitor about, because last time we spoke about this topic, I remember he got really excited at the end when he was talking about his belief that this sort of popular communitarian approach to knowledge, there's something good about it. Like there's something that is funny that in the left, like Marxists have a theory of knowledge based on labor, experience, that has a lot to do with this sort of empiricist conspiracy stuff. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that, Vitor, because I think it would be good to also work through that, right? Understand better how we can distinguish three things, like actual science from like state-sponsored public scientific discourse, which is something else, and from out science. Like these three things should be distinguishable, right?
Yeah, I think that's a real that's an important problem for us. The issue of producing communist theory and why there isn't just occultism. I don't know what different is what's the difference between us and them in the sense that most economists, for example, tend to think capitalism is eternal and models are produced and the practical application of the knowledge is in capitalism, and we are thinking something that does not yet exist, but also in some way exists. I think in that way, we have a bit of a problem that we have solved here in Brazil by creating, something of a Gramscian strategy of legitimizing it by university departments producing this officially, and it kind of, since there are university group research, Marxism is not a religion, Marxism is science. There's that. I think a significant part of the left try to legitimize communist theory through, you could say, internal contradictions of university spaces. But that may, but there is another tradition that of the autonomous left, the Italians and the what's the name? The inquiry, the militant inquiry that proposes that it is possible to produce valid and effective knowledge that is not based on the scientific method exactly, in the Popper scientific method, but it is possible to analyze a workplace, see how people resist in the workplace, produce knowledge, share it with other people, with other workers, and create a community of experts that produces some type of knowledge that is legitimate and effective. And I think our problem lies in how do we legitimize our knowledge? Is it because it is effective for political action? Or is there something more to it? Because I remember you saying that Capital is the first book where a child worker gets to talk and be heard by and read by everyone, and that is something important too. There is something of universal in the knowledge that is produced from the point of view of the worker. We can apply scientific rigor and try to replicate, but it is in other terms than those of science generally proposes. But I think that's something that I think the answer we found in the 20th century of infiltrating the academy, so to speak, the far right has managed to do something that is more effective in producing knowledge connected to political action and alternative means of organizing than us. We are still pretty attached to the university, and Olavo de Carvalho produced many disciples that each of his disciples has a course that Nicolas Ferreira, that guy in Minas Gerais, who got 400,000 votes, he has a theology course in which he produces some type of knowledge and organizes people there. I don't know what he does it. That's why I'm so interested in how the right does it, because I think we in the left are still in baby steps in that sector of doing our own thing, knowing that most of us won't get to be university professors. That's out of the question for most of us now. So we need to do. The right always knew they would be excluded, so that a decade earlier than us, they took the head start. So I don't know. I think this movement it resonates not only because we live in reactionary times, but because there is a crisis in the liberal establishment, and the university is part of it, and they have decided to solve the crisis by overtaking new institutions, new forms of knowledge, however flawed, and we have mostly in the left chosen to be conservative and protect what we have, because we don't have anything to offer. We don't have a project or a proposal that would solve the crisis and also be workable, I think.
I was gonna just a commentary, because Anna was asking if the issue of truth is relevant, because we were talking about knowledge, we were talking about that as well now, and beliefs and so on. I think that there is a good way of summarizing a lot of this discussion, which is belief, like the systems of beliefs have more to, let's say, they don't really foment exceptionality in the sense of there is a better knowledge over others, right? Let's say, or more correct. They tend to be like common sense. They tend towards the common. Knowledge tends towards something more exceptional, in the sense that you have like asymmetries between who knows and who doesn't know, whereas beliefs tend to function in such a way that everyone feels more dignified, like a person, like an agent. And truth concerns when you have both, right? You should be able to have something which is exceptional, in the sense that there are statements that are more interesting than others, but that they are common in the sense that they apply to many contexts. They're not tied to contexts, nor asymmetric like knowledge, right? So when you talk about like the proletariat science and prolecult and all those ideas about workers developing their own scientific approach to science and to thinking in general, I think the core idea behind it all was that what makes, like, you can asymptotically approach science from a different place, rather than start from already constituted scientific method. Which actually, honestly, this is for me the core of Badiou's theory in a nutshell, and also the reason why it has no problem ultimately with relativism, post-truth, whatever you want to call it. Most theories of truth are like this. They say something is common because it is true, right? So because something is true, it should be valid everywhere. That's why it's common. Badiou's theory says something is true because it is common. If it is valid everywhere, you cannot find an exception. You go looking everywhere for the exception, you never find it. Then that's what we call true, right? So that idea of inverting the two things, where exactly as Bob is saying here, this hierarchy of ideas and equality of people, right? I feel like we could call bourgeois science starts from hierarchy of ideas and wants to develop equality of people. So you want to start by saying there are true ideas, and because there are true ideas, they will apply equally to everyone. That's like you get for free, which is kind of what we expect from science right now. There are correct scientific facts. They should be the common facts. The common beliefs should be based on them because they're true, right? And I feel like what the Marxist point of view assumes is the inverse, which is it's because people are equal that we will learn about hierarchy of ideas. Like if something's truly equal, if it's truly valid for everyone, if it's truly efficacious and useful to everyone, then it is true. And you can say, but this is relativistic because it's based on people. Well, but if everyone who's living, who's still to be alive in the future, who we ever meet, all of them try to see if it's true or if it works, and it continues to work, then pragmatically, it's the same thing as saying it was always true. right? So I have the impression that that inversion is really useful. It has a lot to do with what John was presenting here, that I think that there are two ways of approaching this. And I find it interesting to see that if you try to scientificize politics, like make science put politics into motion, you usually try to do this. You see beliefs create common spaces, knowledge create exceptional spaces, and then you say, well, science has the truth. It should bring the two together automatically. Exceptional statements that are common to everyone, right? And it should organize people. It should magically make things happen. Whereas I think the Marxist point of view in a Badiouian Platonist strange conjunction is the inverse, which is precisely when you try to make sure that an exception is common to everyone. So when you assume equality as the place you start from, that's how you learn if something's proved the exception, right? So it ends up not being caught up. It could not be caught up, at least potentially, I think, in this kind of dead end where you get large economies of belief. On the other hand, large asymmetries and kind of repressed asymmetries, inequalities of knowledge. And then we just want science to kind of come in and help us and solve it. On the other hand, like a fourth position would be to say that there is something about this old idea of a worker science, a proletarian science, or science developed from the labor point of view, where by moving ahead with the finding resistance, the Latourian thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually teaching a class on Latour tomorrow. I have the impression that these guys they have a really good idea in terms of they have really interesting tools because they're very pragmatic. They're very they have an interesting refocusing of knowledge in a more pragmatic, like I think they make a similar idea that, well, truth is as truth as it is common to a certain field, which I think it's very Badiouian in this inversion, but they have a very poor idea of what politics is, I think. Like they're not really interested in bringing people to do anything, I feel. I have the impression that often they're more concerned with expanding the list of agents we should negotiate with than, making it easier to negotiate with whoever's around already. So I find it, I'm a bit skeptic. On the one hand, I find it like they have really good tools. Yeah, I see from my Latourian friends, like who Stangers, Latour, Donna Haraway, like people who studied them, usually they don't really like the idea that this is not a problem for Badiou or for that tradition, that, this is okay, like nobody's gonna fight you on that, but there's still more stuff to do. I don't think that they like this fact very much, that there is some version of a strange Marxism that could encompass their approach. I think that is usually not very well taken. And I do feel like they are on the verge. Latour, in my opinion, Latour was very much on the verge of coming up with something good in his modes of investigations and modes of existence, where he had this very kind of, he sounded like a classic analytic philosopher, because he was trying to say like, oh, there are some contexts created by what he calls reference networks, and these reference networks form the basis for what conditions of felicity, right, of a discourse. Like, what are the real networks of connections between people and whatever other things that make up a kind of a fabric And in that fabric, some words and ways of speaking make sense and others don't. And then you move somewhere else, and now the same speech makes no sense, right? I think that that idea is very much like what Badiou calls real atoms, phenomenal components, like all those parts of logics of words are exactly that. They function very similarly, but he took it to a very weird direction. So I think he lost the opportunity of making a nice contribution there, like at least something more in line with what we've been dealing with. Anna, could you explain better what you mean? I'm not sure I understood. Sure. You know, like I just feel like one thing, Vito, that your presentation, because we never really mentioned this, we never talk about this, like we're still starting to prepare ideas to discuss climate change and to discuss, I think your presentation on early treatment is one of the first that we have the opportunity to discuss this, which is in the background of what we've been doing, there is this distinction between scientific knowledge and political knowledge. Like we actually have an idea that there is something that's political knowledge that is not the same as science, right? But that is rigorous. And I feel like this is a useful ingredient because usually people assume that if you are bringing knowledge into the picture, that then it's scientific. If it's not scientific, then it's like a belief, right? And I have the impression that there is something to this that is quite relevant. For example, I've been reading up on this movement that I find very interesting. It's actually a bit old, but people were suggesting that a crucial part of fighting climate change is to developing climate technology that predicts the weather like small, kind of like 6 months ahead, that farmers can use. So their idea is that you can't really get people to engage with like global climate change science if there is no use to the knowledge anywhere else. Like it's just a belief because there is no knowledge. You don't learn anything from it. It couldn't go wrong and it would change something. Like you're acting in a way now, and then somebody tells you, well, but it was wrong. We were wrong about climate change. Nothing changes. Then it was never a knowledge. It was just a belief that helped you create a group or to make some decisions, things like this. And the idea of these people is that it would be useful, like to focus on developing science that farmers can directly use, so they get to contribute. They see, you know, like information about their farms is relevant to the scientist, who then does something that is relevant to the crop for next season. And once you have that system going, that person has like knowledge stakes on climate science, not beliefs alone, because they help to see, like they help expand the scientific reach. They're not just passively receiving information and supposed to believe in it, you know? And I feel like this network that they are trying to create is not scientific. Like to develop science, you wouldn't need to create that network, right? It's something slightly different. You're trying to create a network where how people decide to organize their farms is going to be dependent on what other farmers are doing and what scientists are doing. Scientists start having a place in the organization of the farm and not just as a different thing that has nothing to do with the farmer. Like that type of circuit is not really about scientific knowledge, because the knowledge itself might be already known. It's about a political type of knowledge, right? About, let's say, the size of the social world, who is affected, who is not, how we feed people, what are the forces of nature we need to consider, things like this. I think that this for me today is like the thing that I think the most when I try to find an example, very concrete example of why political knowledge being distinguished from scientific knowledge, but not in a contradictory way, is relevant for all these discussions about why science fails to mobilize people and what should go in its place, you know? I mean, I just reminded this because then I was talking here about there being something unique to politics, right?
There was a magazine, and I don't know if you read this book, Drone Theory.
No, I didn't.
Gregory Schmeier. It's called Science for the People. It was in it was published in 1973, and they talk about how politically important it was to explain how making the war based on planes dropping bombs instead of soldiers, how important it was to explain it in a form that people could understand, how it would cause massacre and slaughter of people despite seeming more safer for soldiers. It's like, it sounds a bit similar to what you're saying. It's like we have a new technology in the example here. We can do war drones or planes that can kill the enemy without our people dying. How do we fight that? We have to produce some sort of knowledge that shows that we are massacring people who, and that isn't right. I don't know, you know, it's like, what's the argument for people against the movement for climate change? Jobs. It's much like COVID. We need to survive. We need to mine. We need to produce cars. Because people need to work and the economy needs to function. And what do we have against? It's like you said. We have in 30 years there will be it's very difficult to convince someone with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, and strikes me to believe in something like that. There has to be a leap to the accept. Yeah, I'm not sure I follow. I mean, I don't think you should, just to be clear, I don't think you should think about these things in terms of temporal dynamics, like we will just say everyone's equal, and then whatever people say, that's where we start from. But it's just think of it in terms of how you formulate the grammar of your ideas. Like, one thing is for you to say, this will apply everywhere because it is true. So true comes first. That's why it will apply everywhere. Another thing is to say, let's see if it applies everywhere. And then it will be true. Where going to see if it is true everywhere is a condition for something to be true. Like, it will just make you do different things and value different things, but both aspects are mixed all the time, right? I think the point is just to say that believing the idea, okay, to be very kind of classical, I would say the bourgeois idea that things are common because they're true is actually in actual practice based on the fact that there was a shared social space called the public space that was built on a particular economy. That guaranteed that it was common, not the fact that it was true. So it was always commonality first, truth afterwards, but it looked like it wasn't, just because there was a social system based on reproducing the public space, right? Now that that's not really well established, while some people are becoming desperate, as if a new moment in the history of mankind appeared, post-truth, what we actually get is the normal situation of all the time. Like, nothing changed. It's just that you cannot count on the bourgeois public space to guarantee that what is, common is socially homogeneous. You need to check, right? But that's not new in itself. So I don't think there's anything new about this. And I also don't think, it's just that it's probably, yeah, you do your own research. But that's the crazy thing. Like, you either get QAnon on one side who says, you do your own research, but we have no method of assessing, the exception. So what is the true statement and what are the false statements? You do your own research. We are against authorities and so on. Or you get the authoritarian exceptionalism of there is experts in true knowledge, and we pretend like there is something common, but there is not, right? So you get like pure common with no, let's say, invariant, or with no kind of exception, or you get pure exception with no commonality. Then you have the bourgeois middle ground, which is, hey guys, but when you have a public space, there is one knowledge that is common to everyone. But we all know today that that was a fake thing. That wasn't true. That was just common shared beliefs, right? And now you need a fourth thing, which is how do you do your own research, conspiracy right-wing, with authoritarian liberalism, which is there is truth, and you need to bring the two together again, but from below rather than from above. That's why we're fucked. We're both fucked, and it's a really good moment to do things, because I don't think it's for anything that, like, we have so many para-academic groups like our own. We are both doing our own research and trying to create a criteria for, let's say, something having an authority over ourselves rather than ourselves, so that we can actually be wrong. So it's not just like equality first, apolitically, but I think that, I'm not sure how what you call the Hegelian, liberal Hegelian friend, but I mean, everyone knows that when you say something like the revolution will happen in the future, you say that to a friend, and then you're friends with the person in the present. So like, you can say it's an empty exception in the future, but organizationally does things in the present. So it's, like, it's doing something now. It's not doing something in the future. I think it fits exactly what we're talking anyway. And also, I mean, philosophy always has it easier. Like, I think that, sure, you can defend a universal future project. I don't think politics has the benefits that philosophy has in that sense. You do need to show the facts now. Like, and I was talking to Vitor the other day. Vitor had like a really hot take, like more than a hot take, a nuclear take that he was going to publish on Twitter. And we were talking about if it was a good idea to publish it or not. And then he said something like, if this is the right take, but it will only produce noise, then it is not the right take. Like, that's a really good synthesis of this, right? If you have an exception, meaning that exceptional idea, but it will not circulate in a common space, it will just be noise. Politically speaking, then it's not the right idea, because you need both. Yeah, the extremely online Mao Zedong would say that. Well, isn't that the definition of Vitor? Yeah, Vitor, I think that's like a summary of your online person. Extremely online now.
I actually think this like binds really well with the distinction between that you and John were saying about the hierarchical ideas and the good. This is like, I think that's like a textbook example.
Yeah, I mean, you know my position on Plato, contemporary Plato for the disoriented citizen. I think that's, I mean, you're going to write a book on that, so you know I back that up. After the people of Plato, now finally the Plato of the people. Yeah, Vitor, man, it was so amazing. I mean, I also have to leave now, but I think it was a really great presentation. I really think we should try to use those diagrams with the stuff you presented. Like, whatever we write next, we should use that as an example because I think it fitted so well.
Thanks. It was a really nice discussion. Really got me thinking.
Good.
So good night.
Sleep well, everyone. I'm gonna go cook. See you, John. See you, Anna. See you, Monica. Bye, guys.